recordings and we don't. If we did, I could do
Yeah.
that.
Okay, so we are live, everybody.
Everyone thinks because you're a zombie, you don't know good coffee. Well, they're wrong. There's only one brew that gets my seal of approval. Deadly Grounds coffee is my guilty pleasure. The aroma is so intoxicating. It brings all of my neighbors out of the woodwork. Deadly Grounds coffee. Coffee to die for and zombie approved. It's good to get a little deadly. Use the front door! Oh, they're so disgusting.
The Dorkening and all affiliated shows are not intended for anyone under the age of 18. The following may contain discussions or scenes that have adult situations, graphic violence, nudity, strong sexual content, and graphic language. This show is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised.
Steve Van Sampson,
Curtis M. Lawson,
Paul Christian Glenn, Joshua Rex, Raz, Rob Smith.
Hey, everybody. Happy Sunday. Welcome to another episode of the Clutch of Personalities. We have Tylor James on with us tonight. This man is very exciting. He's very macabre. He's very the essence of what we do with the Clutch and what we like to have here. It's a nice dark night for him. Pull up, grab a glass of wine, or if you're at a Tosker, he's going with Crown Royal tonight. It's as good as he gets. He does appreciate wine. Sorry, but decent drink he'll go with. But Canadian whiskey for some reason tonight just appealed to him. But yeah, welcome everybody. And we do have some different things going on the way our StreamYard is functioning. It's actually a Facebook issue. So if you have hopped onto Facebook, it is going to redirect you over to YouTube. So I hope that you're all able to follow with us and keep up with us there. Tylor, how are you doing? And thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you. I'm doing quite well. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
Oh, we're very excited. First off, let's see what we got going on here. The book that we're going to be promoting tonight is our Holy Leviathan, which is gorgeous, by the way. This is being put out by Weird House, and it's got all the different flavors coming in for it. We have a bit of like the Lovecraftian thing going on, as you mentioned, Orwell and some others. And I've been reading it. I haven't quite finished that one yet because I was reading all of the short stories and Gator House beforehand. But the creation of personalities that you bring up and how you don't just develop people by their inner thoughts. They have, you do a great job with that, but you also, all of the interactions that people have really help to formulate the personalities, which then in turn really affect the way the rest of the story goes. I feel like I have multiple stories going on at once when I read yours, unlike a lot of writing these days. You just get like blank characters that fill out a story. In this case, there's like the story and the person or people building off of each other. Mm-hmm. So I really appreciate the depth that you go into with that. Are you somebody who the characters start writing themselves in your head and then force themselves out, or do you know what's going to happen with them originally, or how does your writing process work with things like that?
Well, firstly, thank you so much for reading my work, and I have to say that in terms of characters, I tend to approach writing very much like acting. in terms of a character, I pretty much think of it as a role that I'm playing. And even if you're writing a story that doesn't have any characters in it, you still have to play the role of the atmosphere or the tone of the piece. And so, instead of sitting down at the computer at the start of a writing session and asking, what's the next scene going to be, which I certainly ask myself too. Sometimes I just ask myself, who do I want to be today, or what masks do I want to put on? One of the great joys of writing is that there's a vast assortment of personae that you can inhabit. And so, writing a good character, you have to really get into the part. You might even call it method writing, although I wouldn't recommend going out and playing your characters in public unless they happen to be very benevolent. Not all of mine are. And often I have no idea what I'm going to write. Much like Ray Bradbury, he simply sort of dove down into his subconscious every single time he sat down to write. There wasn't, as far as I'm aware, there really wasn't much planning. He just simply sat down and he felt, as opposed to thought out the plot and the characters. And there's some writers who are extremely talented with thinking everything through so that when they sit down, they know what they're going to write. But I have always been the exact opposite. I have an image or a feeling that I want to branch off from, and the characters and plot follow from that feeling. But, Bradbury over his typewriter, I'm sure everyone here has already heard this story, but he had the line, feel, don't think, or don't think above his typewriter. And that was sort of his writing philosophy. And like a lot of people kind of think that it's sort of the antithesis of, being a writer. A writer's supposed to be this great intellectual profession. And it is after you feel everything out, after you write, then you can go back and you can intellectualize and add this and add that and make it look like you were more clever than you initially were.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
Yeah, you do use you don't overuse, but as we tease Curtis with, you do use a number of the $10 words. You got
Yes. Yeah.
you have some stuff that is definitely like, I did have one or two things that I had to look up the words for with you, and I pride myself on my vocabulary, but as I was reading our Holy Leviathan, I am not good with ship terms, even though I've written stuff about a ship before. I didn't get them all in my head. It's something that just didn't stick with me.
Mm-hmm.
So is that something, are these things you just know, or are you the king of research? Because your topics are very diverse,
Mm-hmm.
and everything seems right in everything that you write.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't really consider myself to be too research heavy, but I guess in a way that's I do research in the sense, in particular for our Holy Leviathan, some of the formative influences for that book were Herman Melville's Moby Dick, of course, and a book called In the Heart of the Sea by Nathaniel Philbrick, which is just a wonderful nonfiction book about the tragedy of the Essex whale ship. And just reading those two books, I just absorbed all the terminology that I needed to write my own sea tale that seems to take place, in any case, in the 19th century. So it's not even sitting down and studying. It's just a matter of reading things that were written in that time and absorbing it. Just like if you were cast for a part, you would try to model yourself as much as you could, just by absorbing the person or absorbing the personality, if that makes any sense at all.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And Freddie had a question for you about. I'll just go ahead and let her ask it.
You had said previously that you have emulated both Bradbury and Poe in your writing. About how long did it take you to figure out your stride of your own voice and get to where you felt comfortable as yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say very recently I've come across what I consider to be my own unique style of writing. And that has really only happened, I would say, within the last year or so. Um, Anybody who picks up Daydreams of the Damned or Matters Most Macabre will notice that there's quite a big shift between those books and, say, Old Dark Houses, or in particular this one. I mean, this book is totally different from anything else that I've written. But of course, I was allowed to experiment with 19th century terminology and style, which I love. I love 19th century idiom and that sort of style of writing. And it's, yeah, so I would say quite recently. And I guess what I try to do is, I don't subscribe to the idea that everything in prose has to be cut and dry, that there has to be a huge amount of white space, and you have to settle for like words with less syllables. And you can write very effectively that way, but also I think that the $10 words, so to speak, certainly have their place and can communicate a tremendous deal. So. And I would say my journey in terms of how I write has really just begun. I feel like I've finally found my unique style and way of telling stories, but I'm hoping to develop that as the years go on. So not quite finished yet, but hopefully getting there.
I hope to get to keep reading them.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, yes.
I hope you do.
You have developed a very great voice. I read some of your earlier stuff before, and then I jumped into our Holy Leviathan earlier today, and the difference is very, very observable.
Mhm.
And it's not one of those things though where it's like, say for Terry Pratchett, I love Sir Terry Pratchett. However, in his writing of the Discworld, he started off really rough, and then he built his way up to something. But you were experimenting, it felt like, and then ended up, none of them were bad or felt like this is a kindergartner learning how to finger paint or anything like that. You never had any of that sort of feel to you, like you were trying to learn how to write. So I appreciate that you've worked and found your voice, but you never at any point seemed amateur. And Raz was wanting to ask a question as well.
Yeah. So, what was that process like for you in that discovering your own voice as a writer? Because I know that's different for so many of us, and it's something I'm always interested in knowing what it was like for others.
Oh yeah, that's such a great question. I think it's experimentation, just it's experimentation and repetition. It's just simply sitting down and writing story after story, and just by doing that, you enjoy and are inspired by, and you imbibe those voices, and you write with those voices in your fingertips. But as you continue to do that, you become more aware of, well, maybe that's not quite me, or maybe I'm being too obvious, you know? And so, and then sometimes there's a story that comes through you that is so spontaneous, so organic, and works in all the right ways that a short story works, that at the end of it, you look at it and you go, good God, I've written this thing. And it's not just a pastiche to Poe or Bradbury or Lovecraft or whoever. There is something about it that is unique to me as a person, as a human being. It's got my own thumbprint in it. Nobody else really could have written this story the way that I've written it. They might have had the same idea, the same theme, but they didn't communicate in the way that I've just written it. And so you sort of observe that when it happens, and it's not planned. It just happens from experimentation and repetition. And as you continue to do that, I guess I'll speak for myself. There's these moments of self-doubt. This is kind of a quirky way of formatting a paragraph. What I do is I kind of have this pattern, and it's just this rhythm that I get into, where I'll have an extensive, somewhat solid paragraph, and I'll follow it up with two punchy lines, something that really nails home a point, or it's a poetic, poetic effect, and it all is part of the musicality of the language. And you just have to accept those parts of you that are completely unique And you can't say, well, maybe I shouldn't write that way because somebody will think it's pretentious or somebody will think I'm trying to do something. You just have to write just how it occurs to you to write, if it's truly authentic to you. And you just, as long as you continue to do that, you just develop your own voice quite naturally, I think.
And you said the musicality, and you're also a musician, correct?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so when it comes to your song, do you write your own songs as well, or are you more of a cover artist? Or
Yeah, I write my own songs. Before I chose writing as my all or nothing profession, I played guitar and harmonica and sang in various dive bars, essentially. You know, playing to a crowd of 6 people or, you know, of 40 people. And I would kind of mix in my own songs that I wrote with just covers of rock and roll songs and folk and blues and all that stuff. Yeah.
okay, yeah, I am no musician, but I was a stand-up comedian for a short little bit, and the way that you were describing it, we would always do the setup punchline, then you hit afterwards. You have to like have those follow-up lines that, you know, before you go into the next segue, but it's all about doing that. And it's obviously in a very different way that you do it when you're writing your stories, because you aren't that much of a humorist. But you, in fact, you said that you call yourself macabre fantasy. Do you want to explain that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I use the term macabre fantasy to differentiate from simply writing horror, because when I first started out, I said to myself that I wanted to be a horror writer. And so I wrote horror stories, or what I consider to be horror stories. But as I continued to write, I realized that at the end of it, I didn't want to write horror at all. What I wanted to do was just express myself just through daydreaming on the page. And sometimes that was a horrific element, but often it was just weird and speculative. It's just speculating on things that I'm thinking about or feeling or in my past. It's just a rumination on the page, often in a dark or macabre fashion. And when I would tell people that I wrote horror, they would get the completely wrong idea about what I did, because, you know, I would say, well, they would ask, well, what do you write? I write horror fiction. And they had in mind that I was writing Friday the 13th Part 8 or something like that, you know, which is just something that I'm not really interested in. And so I just kind of thought, oh, what's the most accurate way I can phrase what I write if somebody asked me, and still have it be a convenient answer. And I thought macabre fantasy is the truest thing to what I write. It's just fantasy with macabre, ghastly elements. There was another tangent I was going to go on, but unfortunately I've lost the thread. But yeah, I prefer macabre fantasy, just because I think it's a more accurate term. I don't mind being called horror. I think it's a good way for people to find my work in a bookstore. You know, you're not going to find macabre fantasy section, but yeah, for practical purposes, I like the phrase.
It is a great phrase, and I've never heard it before. Actually, I've heard like just dark fiction in general or speculative and stuff, and it is getting to where I think that we need to have more categories when it comes for looking in a bookstore, for example. I was filling out something the other day for Bandcamp, and what kind of music do you like? Oh, I like metal. Which kind of metal do you like? Oh my God, there are 40 different options. I don't know which one they all are. I think I like these 4 and this one, and I'm not sure exactly what that one is. But it is when you go into the bookstore, there's, you know, Stephen King and Lovecraft and a lot of things paired up together and Poe that are very different from each other in how they're written, but they're all just lumped into one. And Barker, who I think he follows also more with your macabre fantasy type of thing, because a lot of his books aren't horror at all, but that's the only place you're going to find them is in the horror section.
Yep.
So.
Yeah. I work at my day job is as a bookseller at a half-price bookstore in Maplewood, Minnesota. So yes, yeah, I'm quite well aware of the genre discrepancies. I mean, there's just, It's so odd too. You have so for the horror section, we'll have Stephen King down here, and then you'll have Shirley Jackson too. So but what can you do? People need to find the books, and they have their associations and so forth.
And Pastoral would like to know, how much influence for writing does Tyler pull from childhood experiences?
Oh, gosh, I would say quite a bit. So as I mentioned, writing is really a form for me of acting. And when I was a kid, I absolutely loved wearing Halloween masks. I mean, those rubber masks were fantastic. I had Freddy Krueger, Batman. I had Mr. Freeze. I had the Scream character. I had so many masks, and I would just dress up all the time. And so just that early tendency to um, experiment with persona has continued even with my writing. I'll share a little story because it connects with childhood a little bit. So recently, I just wrote a story that was inspired by my going back to where I grew up. And I grew up in a century-old farmhouse out in the country in the Midwest. Um, and I recently went back there, and the old house that I grew up in has been torn down, leveled. I knew that, so I wasn't surprised. Um, but I went back onto the property, and it was it's 110 acres, just this beautiful cornfield, and interspersed with these lush green woods. It was just a marvelous place to grow up. And so I went back on this land, and I'm also highly inspired by my grandfather, and all his old tractor trails were back there. And so I followed all the old trails that were still there. And I went down this dip in the woods, and I saw these strange white objects sticking out of the ground. And I went over to them, and they were just in the woods. And they ended up being the bones of a horse. And the strange thing is, I knew who the horse used to be. It used to be my childhood horse, Wendy, because when she died, my folks had taken her back into the woods and left her there. And so just after 15 years of not being on this land, I come back and I picked up her skull, and I just had these strange flashes of how the horse looked in life, the twitching of the ears, the reflective gloss in her eyes, and just holding up the skull at the same time, a real kind of Hamlet moment. But just by having that experience, I went home, and a week later I wrote this great little story called Horse Girl. And so I would say, yeah, childhood is a wonderful place to mine for stories. Absolutely. And they like childhood themes seem to crop up just organically when you're writing all the time.
I appreciate that. I partially grew up on 60 acres that we had, like about an acre and a half of farmable land up on the top property, and then it cut down a bluff that they'd actually cut a Z into so that you could get down it without with a vehicle. And we when we were kids, I loved to run around by myself there, but as a group, the kids had found on the property a skeleton, and it was just an old cow. But we didn't know that. We were all caught up in Indiana Jones and all the different things, and so we thought we were excavating. I remember, we will not let her forget it. My stepsister, to this day, at one point said, "Oh my God, you guys, what if it's a rhino?" And so little things like that. But all that forest and having that area to yourself is very inspirational. And Friday had another question about some of your inspiration as well.
Oh, yes.
You are a beautiful photographer. I mean, do any of your pictures inspire your work?
Oh, thank you very much. Well, I don't know if the pictures inspire my work, but certainly I do end up taking pictures of things that, of course, I find them intriguing or relevant in a way. So I guess in a way they do. I would say that I've written some stories that take place in cemeteries. and often I'll take pictures of various gravestones that I think are interesting. So yeah, I would certainly say so. In particular, I just wrote this story that is loosely based on the history of the town that I live in, New Richmond. And if you go through the cemetery that's more on the south end of town, you will notice that a lot of the gravestones read June 12th, 1899. And New Richmond is, I believe it's the site of the ninth deadliest tornado in United States history. Right around it was in June 12th, 1899, a tornado came through, and it just really decimated the town. In fact, they consider New Richmond to be the town that they built twice. Houses and were leveled, and I think somewhere around 115 or 118 people died. And that's why when you go to that cemetery, June 12th, 1899 is such a ubiquitous date. And which of course I've taken plenty of pictures of. Yeah, I would say pictures and history and childhood, and sometimes it's just strange things that people say to you, just happenstance, that just end up as great ideas for stories.
And thank you again for sharing them.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yes,
My pleasure.
I am astounded by your wheelhouse. Seems to cover just about everything. In Daydreams of the Damned, Tales of Horror and Oddity, which was released in 2020, guys. We have just glorious caricatures. There is some sci-fi. There is some classic. There's some Western kind of stuff going on. There are just horrifying tales where I'm sorry, the one that was the hardest for me to reach was hardest for me to read was The Ultimate Torture of Charles Nevermore. And it's very Bradbury. It's very Fahrenheit 451. And if you enjoy that at all, definitely go get this book. You can find it on Amazon. I'm not sure where else. You can find it on your website, obviously, I think, but is the easiest place to go for that one to be on Amazon.
I would say so. Mm-hmm.
And it's just a wonderful collection, and it's your earliest one that I could find collection of published tales. Okay,
Yep.
yeah, it's a great taste of everything. And if you guys want to check out something else, what we will be giving away tonight is going to be Beneath the Jack-o'-lantern Sky, Tales of Sweet Hollow. And this is one that if you're watching us right now, please interact, say something in the comments, and it will enter you automatically to be put into a drawing. And at the end of the show, we'll go ahead and do a spin, and somebody will end up winning a copy of this. So, okay. Oh, while I was going off looking at things, I tab around a lot while I'm talking, so I sometimes miss the comments. But what kind of stories are you planning on writing next? And are there more planned collections of short stories?
Oh, yeah. Great question. Yes, I have a short story collection that will be coming out through Weird House late this year, that will be broken up into 4 different themes. And it's my longest work, and I think it's also my best stories to date. Let's see. Well, so the main categories are apocalypse stories, nature stories, ocean stories, and then there's also a section for Gothic poetry as well. Very much in the vein of Poe. They're formal metered poems. And yeah, this will be called The Wikis and Other Macabre Tales. The beginning of the book is a lighthouse story, so hence the term wiki. So I've got that coming out later this year. I'm not quite sure when, but that'll be through Weird House. And then right now I'm working on essentially what I hope will end up being 2 different themed collections. One of them will be tales that all take place in the Victorian era. And I think my good friend Joshua Rex really inspired that. He wrote a wonderful book called Haunted Victorian America that is just, it's such a stellar collection of stories. I highly recommend people pick that up, or any of Joshua's works. So I'm working right now on that, and I also have, I hope to do a science fiction fantasy collection at some point too. I've only been successful at a couple science fiction stories, but I'm really intrigued to explore that a bit more. So I think in the future, hopefully, people will find those collections too. So
We are as well. And if you guys are not familiar with Joshua Rex, hop over to our website over on YouTube, and you can go through our playlist of the collection. We have had Joshua Rex on here before. Fabulous man, total absolute historian. He actually works as he works at museums. I can't remember the word for his current title because he, I think, got moved up from the last title I had for him. But he gives tours, and he is absolutely fascinated with Victorian America, as opposed to which is a very different place than Victorian England and such, was where we get a lot of our other stories. So he is very fun. And you can find it. Yeah, he's on our All Light playlist. So you write, though, both short stories and you've written novellas and stuff now.
Mhm.
So which do you find is it something where for me, and I'm not sure about these two for sure, but for me, it's like I have the novels in the back that I work on slowly, and then I can suddenly just kind of throw up a couple of short stories every now, sometimes it's just like I have one that I've been working on for 2 years because I can't get that one transition right. But the novels take me a lot longer to work on. But you seem to be kind of comfortable doing both, although you have an amazing amount of short stories. I guess what I'm asking is which is more difficult for you, or which comes more natural to you?
Sure. I would say that the novel is damn difficult for me. I wish I was a natural novelist. I am not. I love short stories. That's my primary form. I'm very comfortable with the novella. I very much enjoy novellas. The one novel that I've written, Old Dark Houses, a Halloween novel, that, there are great bursts of joy in that book, but a great deal it was quite difficult for me to do, just because just the length is challenging. You have to keep continually adding to the drama of the situation and have it be organic to the whole story in order for it to work. So I've yet to master the novel, but I think I've got at least a couple more in me, so long as I continue to exist. So yeah, novels are tough. Short stories are just complete joy. And it's also, they're a sort of a short term piece of art. You can sit down, and within a single day or within a couple days, you have a short story, and it's very rewarding. Whereas a novel is, you just have to commit to the long term of that. And I'm also one of those people who, once I start something, I have to see it all the way through to the end. Otherwise, I just get this feeling of feeling unresolved and anxious. So, like, when I start a short story, it's got to be done by the end of the week. If I start a novel, I try to have a date by which I would like it to be finished. So, which is good. It keeps me on task.
Yeah, that's one of my that's my Achilles tendon. I try to research too much, and I don't know if you've ever tried to do NaNoWriMo before.
I have. Yep. Mm-hmm.
How successful have you been with that? It's something I always like to check with people about.
Yes. Well, I've succeeded in I think it's a 50,000 word goal. Yes, I have been successful in that. The books have not been successful. I've read, funny enough, the first novel I wrote was kicked off by NaNoWriMo, and it was also called Old Dark Houses, but it was about something completely different. And that ended up being, I think, 120,000 words. So it spilled over into the next month, and it's a really terrible, trashy book. But of course, one has to write that, or so I hear, to sort of get it out of one's system, so to speak, to move on to better things.
Raz is one of our successful NaNoWriMo writers, and I can't do it because I immediately start editing myself, and you're not supposed to, and I can't get past that. But
I've done it like 8 or 9 years in a row, and I've hit it every time. But like, there's been times where I've hit like 50,003 words, and I'm like made it in the last like 20, 30 minutes. There was 1 year where I did 78,000 words and had like 11 days to go, and I don't know how I did that. I'll never be able to repeat that. But then I don't want to write again for like 2 or 3 months. Like, I just spend time editing what I did and just not writing anything new because I have no brain left after that.
Yes,
I'm just melted.
Gosh,
yeah, it's just
that's impressive.
It's counterintuitive to how I function, because everything, I don't know how much inspiration you get from dreams, but I sleep a lot, and it's an ongoing joke because I average like over 10 and a half hours to sleep a night. I've gone up to like, sometimes I'll sleep for 20 hours at a shot, and it's kind of like I wake up to take medication and then just go back to bed. And but I dream on like steroids, is what my mother describes it as. She's like, other people just remember that somebody was chasing them and that was the end of the dream. You're like, and I can remember like the font style used on a brochure that I read, and yes, I can read in my dreams, and all these different little tiny aspects that make things up. And so I wait, and I'll sit there and I'll start pulling myself into sleep by focusing on what the story is going to be. And then now I have my phone beside me in bed, so I can hit a button real quick, and I always, I'll remember that. And I finally have decided, no, I won't. So I have the like, and then I say what I'm dreaming about. And it turns out to be things, as I was saying before, like I have to drug the puppies, and then I have no idea what I'm talking about.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, dreams are such fascinating and mysterious phenomena, and particularly because, I mean, you're just dealing with the raw material of the subconscious, when you dream, which I just find absolutely fascinating.
Are you someone who does recall their dreams and can write about them, or do they interest you to write about even?
They certainly interest me, but no, I don't remember them very well, and I really wish I did. However, I find that every once in a while, I come up with a story idea just based on hypnagogia, just the moment of falling to sleep but not quite there, and the images that arise from that I find to be a very good place for story ideas, because I'm not so deep into sleep that when I wake up, they fade from my memory, but I'm just in that perfect state where I can bring it out. And often it's not even an idea, it's just an image. It's just one strange image, and then the story can blossom from there. Like, I had this one image of, I was in this sort of a deep green woods, and there was a tree that was cut down, and there was this hollow tree stump, and there was this strange kind of liquid within the stump, and somebody was there stirring, like a witch, I suppose, whatever was in the stump with a stick. And just that image kicked off a really good story, which will be in my next collection. But
very nice.
Mm-hmm. But you're able to pull quite a lot of stories from your dreams then?
Yeah, I keep a pretty decent journal. If they're fun enough, I post them on Facebook, but otherwise I have a file of dream folders, and it's all, I have very similar dreamscapes where everything has rules. You can only travel from certain places by certain means. Like, and a lot of it has to do with like my hometown and stuff. And I can only get from my grandparents' cabin on the river by Takema, that's between Nebraska and Iowa, on the Missouri River there. You have to actually swim that all the way into Omaha. And then you can if you go to the theme park, that's there. You can ride the water slide into Lincoln, or you can take it into Kearney in various ways. And like, you can only travel this way by bicycle, this way by train.
Oh, interesting.
There are different things that live and exist in each world, but I have multiples of those. So I try to capture everything. Like, I have a couple of stories about my hometown, which I am not the only person from my hometown who suffers severe nightmares about it. And there was nothing growing up that was necessarily horrifying that happened there. You know, we didn't have any, it was just kind of an odd place. And I've spoken to people who've lived in much odder places and nobody else was disturbed by it. But a couple of my friends all around my age who like visited the same babysitter and had kind of similar upbringings or whatever, we all have similar nightmares about this town. So it's something that it's going to be one of those where I can write the stories about it, but I don't want to release them in individual things. I want to wait until I get them all put together and have the collection, you know. And obviously I can't have it be like, and then we rode on bicycles because we had to get to this place, or we flew because that was the only way to get to this place. I'll leave those parts out, but the ongoing things, like we had an old slough that they called the old lake that's where the riverbed used to go, and then it cut off, and it was just always dank, and it was like the bog of eternal stench kind of thing from the labyrinth. And I always, in my dreams, I'll smell that horrible smell and see white-bellied fish upside down in the black waters. And so I have some great stuff coming up from that, but I need to wait until I get them all together, you know.
Yeah, that's a fabulous idea for a collection.
It's just it's the things that you get. You take what you're fed and what you can realize. So, oh, Friday has a very interesting question.
You are so imaginative and have so many great and well written characters. Which one would you like to have coffee with and actually just talk and have a conversation with, like you are us?
Oh man. Honestly, I might regret saying this if this should ever become reality, but in my book Old Dark Houses, there's a character, a ghost by the name of Charles Valency, and he's really a malicious, vainglorious character. But he has a fantastic sense of style. He dresses very well. He's a consumer and connoisseur of the arts and literature. And despite his cruelty, I think that he would be pretty interesting to have a conversation with. So I would say Charles Valency. He might try to kill me during the conversation, but I'd stick with that answer. Yeah.
Isn't it part of the fun, though?
I think the danger is certainly part of the fun. Yep, I think that's a great point.
I think I'm going to flip that around on you now and ask. You've listed a couple of authors that you were very enamored with and very. They were very influential on your writing. Which of those, or any other author, if you could meet them in their prime with all of their knowledge still intact, and able to speak in the same language as, I suppose, because the further back you go, the stranger things get. Who would you like to sit down and have your cup of coffee or a glass of wine or something with, out of all of the fabulous folks in the past? And if there's more than one, feel free. But
gosh, I have to say Poe. I would love to sit down with Poe. Maybe not in a tavern. He's more likely to become very unruly. But by a fireside, perhaps. Fireside chat with Edgar Allan Poe. I think that would be pretty fantastic. I would get his opinions on all the literary figures of his time. I'm sure he would go on and on about how much he loved Hawthorne and how much he hated Longfellow. I think that would be very entertaining to listen to. Of course, I would be very tempted to bring some sort of recording device with me, just to bring it back. I mean, I would be fascinated to hear the man's voice and just to hear him. So yeah, Poe, absolutely. Tea by the fireside, I see with Poe. With Bradbury, I think sitting down, having a beer or I don't know, maybe a kind of a fruity drink with Bradbury. I know that he did drink a little. He is just such an exuberant character. He really was one of those people who had such a zest for life, just sucked the marrow out of the bones of life itself. And he is just fantastic. I would love to have a chat with him. And I mean, we're very lucky that we have so much recorded material from Bradbury, his recorded lectures and so forth, which are fantastic sources of inspiration. Whenever I am not feeling well creatively, I go back, and there's this one particular lecture that Ray Bradbury did, I think for I forget which university, but it's just so motivating and so powerful. Yeah, a man of passion, to be sure.
Was it a lesson or a graduation type of thing?
I think it was just a lesson. I don't think it was a commencement ceremony of any sort. Yeah.
I'm sorry I cut off your train of thought there. I just wanted to
Oh no, not
know
at
so
all.
that I can try to look it up
Yeah,
later.
absolutely.
Do you know what it was about? So we can.
You know what? I bet I could find it pretty damn quick here. Forgive me one moment.
Will you put it in the comments?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, so it's called An Evening with Ray Bradbury. I'm going to copy the link here. Paste it. Okay. Oh, I put it in the private chat. Let me see here.
That's okay. I can post it so it goes to everyone.
Okay.
Oh, you got it, Friday?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
All right.
Yeah, I really do enjoy Ray Bradbury. I've been so proud. My nephew, when he was younger, I was the first person. He was really into reading. I was someone who started reading when I was really young as well. I was reading. They now call them chapter books. I just called them books, But I was reading the chapter books like the Chronicles of Narnia and stuff when I was 5, and then going up to Tolkien when I was 8, and doing all this stuff. But being able to, I lived in a very small town and we didn't have a lot around us. But my nephew, I live in the big city of Lincoln, Nebraska right now, and starting him when he was quite young with his first Bradbury collection. I was so proud to like show him that and get him involved with what I thought was, and he's a genius. But
Wonderful.
I'm not sure. Have you ever? And this is brought on because of The Ultimate Torture of Charles Nevermore. Have you ever read Neil Gaiman's The Man Who Forgot Ray Bradbury?
I think I have read it. Yes. Yeah. It's been quite some time, but yeah, I remember enjoying the story quite a bit. Yeah, Gaiman's fantastic all around. I haven't read nearly as much of his work as I would like to, but I'm a big fan of his short stories in particular.
All right. And Raz, you had further on Bradbury?
Yeah, so I've loved pretty much everything he's ever done. For some reason, when I was a kid on the Disney Channel, they decided to air Something Wicked This Way Comes, which then made me as a child go and immediately read it. And that is one that I actually listen to on Audible a couple times a year, but I also physically read it once a year. Right around Halloween time, I'll read it. But I just finished listening to the audio again last week. So that leads me to ask you, what do you have one Bradbury story that's a little bit just more personal to you?
Well, I would say that my favorite collection from Bradbury is Long After Midnight. That was the first collection of his that I read, and I just completely fell in love with his voice, his style of writing, just that unique person in that writing. And oddly enough, I found this book at this bottom of a cardboard box filled with a bunch of other books. It didn't have a dust jacket or anything. And I picked it up, I read the first story, and I was just completely absorbed, and have read a great deal of his other work since. So I would say Long After Midnight's my favorite book of his. Of course, there's stories that he's written. It's such a cliche. Well, it's just so typical to mention, but The Foghorn is just one of those stories that is perfect. There's certain stories that are written that it would be blasphemy to change a single word or a single syllable of any of the words. It's just a perfect short story. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very strange. I'm going to jump back into the small town thing again. You're in the Midwest. Was the and you said you grew up on a farm, so was it a small town type of situation for you as well when you were going
Yeah.
through schooling?
Yep.
We had my high school was on a rural route, and we had a bunch of different tiny towns that contributed students in for the I had a graduating class of like 63 people, I believe, or something like that, from like 4 different small towns and all the little farmers and stuff that lived around it. And we had our library, the way that we met other nerds was who was hanging out in the library, and you'd check the cards when you were checking books out of the library, because I was the first person from the set since the 70s who had checked out there in the like late 80s, early 90s, any of the Ray Bradbury stuff. I read my entire fiction section in 1 year, and some of them multiple times, but I had, my name was on like the same Ray Bradbury book 4 or 5 times. I'd check it out. And then I'd see somebody else who, oh my goodness, this person is still going to school here and they're reading this. So I'd go out of my way to get to know them. And that's how we kind of made little clubs and friends out of each other, was the
Well,
library club.
yeah, I like that very much.
Yeah, but Bradbury was a big part of our library club because they didn't have most of the other writers. There was no H.P. Lovecraft there. There was no Stephen King there. There was nothing horror or very old except for Bradbury. And I can't count how many times I read those books, because you couldn't, where I was at, you couldn't just go out and buy them. It was so rural, and it's before they had like Barnes and Nobles and all that stuff, and I wasn't going to find them in the local Walmart. So as limited as my library was, it was my favorite place to be, and it's where I got to meet all of my friends. So um, it, after saying all of that, I was going to ask about your schooling and such, like living in a rural area in Midwest as well. Like,
Yeah.
but because I believe you're quite a bit younger than I am, so you probably had a little bit more opportunity to see things and better books and stuff available to you. But were you a library fan as well?
I've loved books from an early age. I've always enjoyed the library. I pretty much grew up in, I would say, in a cultural wasteland. There just was not much there. I mean, I really lived way out in the country, and so town required a special. Usually, it was a grocery trip. My mom and I would go buy the groceries, and that way I got into town. And my school, I went to school in Spring Valley. That was a very small town as well. But luckily, one of the first books that I read that really inspired me, well, first the Goosebump books, R.L. Stine. Just having that macabre material early on was great. But when I was in the 5th grade, I came across War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, and The Time Machine as well. I believe it was a book that had 3 H.G. Wells stories in it. And I read that, and I believe at that time you were all the students were ranked in terms of their reading ability, and they were told to seek out books that were within their rank. And this one was supposedly outside my rank. I don't know, but I picked it up, and the teacher had said, "Well, don't you think that might be a little bit challenging?" And I was just absorbed, and I just loved it so much. So thankfully, I did have access to really key books. But in general, I think aside from just those cultural materials, I've always just naturally been in love with the dark and the macabre themes in life. When I was a kid, Halloween, of course, was the best holiday. I loved it even more than Christmas. And I mentioned earlier how I love to dress up and wear masks. And if I was being told a bedtime story, I loved the ones that had ghosts in them or monsters. Those were always the more interesting ones. I remember there was the Great Illustrated Classics series that came out I believe in the 90s. They had Frankenstein and Dracula, and I would have my parents read those to me, my mom in particular. So I'm really grateful for those influences. I also had access to a VHS collection, and there were horror films that I watched from an early age. It was very odd because I would be watching Toy Story one day, and then the next day it would be Pet Sematary. I remember my grandmother coming into the room once, and she was just bewildered by what was on the screen. And she had said to my mom something to the effect of, why do you let him watch this? And my mom just said, he likes it. And one of the useful lessons that I got as a kid, I remember my mom sitting me down and explaining to me that there's a difference between real life violence and art. The blood that you see on the TV in this movie, Child's Play or whatever it is, it's not, it's made of Karo syrup and food dye and all that stuff. So she really sat me down and she said, just so you know, none of this stuff is real. Nobody's dying in these films. This is all acting. They make the movies, so forth. So that was very instructive to me from an early age. I know I got on a bit of a tangent there, but
Feel free. This is a squirrel show. We love all the squirrels, and he gets drunk, so he allows them to go. We love it when people go off on tangents.
Well, speaking of squirrels, I have a neighbor, Dennis, who feeds the squirrels by hand. They will come up to him, and he's got an entire legion, an army of squirrels out there. But recently, he's had to cease from feeding the squirrels because they've gotten aggressive. So there's the beginning of a story there for you. But I was sitting outside reading a book under my maple tree, and there was this wild, violent chittering right above my head. And there were, for a good minute there, I was fearing for my life. So the squirrels, well, they're serious business.
Mine is called the Ratatosker from Norse mythology, and usually whenever I see squirrels, if they look at me, I'll just Ratatosker at them, and it's interesting. We used to have a neighbor that would feed the squirrels on this. There's a breezeway between my building and the next one, and it's raised up about waist high concrete from where I walk out to where their building sits. And this guy would put out a whole squirrel buffet, and he decorated it and did all these wonderful things. And the squirrels just loved it. They'd get Cheetos. I'd give them banana chips, and we had tons of lovely squirrels. And now I have a bunch of squabbling neighbors with large dogs and outdoor cats, and so we don't have the squirrels that we used to have. But I have had very aggressive squirrel experiences too. There was an area that we would walk downtown in. Sorry, I'm squirreling off on a squirrel story. But there's about a 2-block range if you walked on the east side of the street on the sidewalk, where squirrels would target practice and chatter at you and throw nuts and things and bounce them off of you. They had great precision targeting.
Wow.
And people are like, oh, you're making it up. You're walking and they're just knocking things over. And it's you ask anybody who walked that block, and we would look up and see those little bastages just throwing things at us. And
that's
it
great.
was real. And Friday has another question for you.
I have enjoyed listening to your music videos on your YouTube channel, but I'd also wondered if you listen to music while you write and what type of music you listen to.
Oh,
and I do
thank
love
you.
your taste in movies as well.
Oh, thank you very much. That's very kind of you. Yeah, I do listen to music. I can't really write to anything that has lyrics, which is often the case for a lot of people I hear. But I love I enjoy classical music. I'll put on in particular Bach's Goldberg variations. Amazing, amazing piece. And I will also listen to organ music. I'm a big Bach guy. I love the organ music, the Goldberg variations. I will put on John Carpenter Lost Themes soundtrack 1, 2, and 3. Those are really beautiful atmospheric pieces of art. So yeah, those I kind of listen to over and over and over and over again. I really just don't get tired of those things. And thankfully on YouTube, I mean, there's compilations of, Mozart and Bach and so forth that run like 5 hours. So you really don't even need to worry about stopping writing to go pick out something else to listen to.
Mm.
Yeah. How about you guys? Do you guys write with music?
I tend to write in absolute silence most of the time, but if I do, it has to be something without lyrics or without lyrics that I can understand. I love the band Vordruna, and everything they record is in Norwegian. And I've read the translations. I know what it means, but I don't know what each word means. But I know the underlying, sort of like a symphony, though, you get that feel eventually where you know where the artist is or the composer is coming from, what kind of feelings they're trying to drive into you.
Yeah.
So I use that for falling asleep, because if I'm listening to something with lyrics, I start going along with them and I can't fade out. But that's what I listen to when I'm writing, if I listen to something at all.
Yeah. Wonderful.
What about you guys?
I have a 4-year-old. I do write listening to music, but it's usually whatever the show is that he's listening to or what he's singing to me. Or my middle child, she sings as well, so it's usually one of those mix of things. I don't get to control it most of the time.
And Raz?
So I used to not be able to write with lyrics a long time ago, but when I was going through med school, I've got brain damage, I have memory function issues. But if I can attach something to something I have in my long-term memory, I'll memorize it. So I used a fuck ton of 90s grunge albums to remember every facet of the human body to pass all 3 of my anatomy and physiology courses. So once I started using music to remember things, I was able to utilize music in different ways. So now I definitely now I can actually listen to things with lyrics. As long as it's lyrics that I know so well, I don't have to think about them at all, then I'm good. I use Midnight Syndicate a lot because they do a lot of non-lyric, just amazing different music for D&D fans, for horror. Their stuff is pretty comprehensive. But I definitely put in a lot of Soundgarden, Nirvana, Smashing Pumpkins, and recently I've added a band called Deadbolt. They are like a rockabilly surfer band with a horror theme, and just their whole sound and tone kind of mixes well with Midnight Syndicate and the grunge, just like in this like weird wave pattern. So I had this giant playlist where that's all just combined into one, and I listen to it all in the background on repeat. But again, it's all the ones that have lyrics are just ones I know so well and are tied to other memories that it kind of helps, because some of those memories are also tied to things I end up wanting to write about. So it's about brain programming, I guess, for me.
Okay. I'm going to have us take a quick break. We have some ads to play, and everyone who is watching, please remember to post a comment in the comments so that you can get entered in to win a copy of some of Tylor James's work. And we will be back right after this break. If you need to, this is the time to take a quick run to the potty.
Greetings and shabebans. We are the Retro Reductibus Cephala Podcast, a long-form bi-weekly show that celebrates all the things that made growing up awesome.
Yeah, that sounds good, but I don't know what all those words mean.
I think what Parasite Steve's trying to say is that on Retro Reductibus, we explore a range of retro goodness, from toys, video games, and movies, to cartoons, and even snacks and school lunches.
Oh.
And we do it all with a positive spin, a slew of killer guests, and some very adult language.
And you know what else is cool?
No.
This crazy show is part of the Door King Podcast Network with new episodes every Tentacle Tuesday.
What's that?
And if waiting 2 weeks for a new episode gives you a sad, know that we drop bonus episodes all the time, like the off-format Crow's Nest and an interview series we call The Brick.
You can listen to Retro Octopus on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or any app that's cool enough to carry the only show that celebrates all the things that make growing up awesome.
Hey everybody, welcome back. And yes, I did say potty.
You have a potty mouth. I just
do.
noticed something absolutely hilarious. I slaved over making all those commercials the other day, right? Like redoing them all. And I just noticed the first time after we played this, the one for ads, the last one we played, if you actually look at that, it doesn't say the owllightnetwork.com. It says owllightnetwalk.com. Apparently I forgot an R when my brain was melting. I'm going to have to go fix that now. Yeah.
Well, that gets added to Raz's to-do list.
Yeah, the ever-growing to-do list.
We've made these. It's an ongoing thing, unfortunately. Raz can do this. Raz can do that. Hey, Raz.
I
And
made
then
them
we have-
start a Google Doc to add things to it. And on days when I feel like I can get some shit done, sometimes they go in there's like one thing. Sometimes they go in there's like 15 things. And I'm like, oh,
So then he strikes through, and we remember that it's done somewhere. And Raz has it rough. He has to do all of our video stuff for us, pretty much. So that's what's fun. I got completely lost, but oh no, Raz, you had the next question. Tropes.
Oh, yeah. So we were talking about how, you were talking about growing up kind of also with Goosebumps, and you like the stories about monsters and ghosts. Taking that a step further, is there a particular horror trope that you tend to find yourself enjoying more?
I've got to say, probably the haunted house. I think, houses in general are such versatile metaphors, and so they're a great deal of fun to write about. Indeed, Old Dark Houses is a novel that is about 3 different historic houses in one town and how they are all connected together in a supernatural manner. So I love the haunted house trope, and I think also because I'm obsessed with Victorian style architecture when I'm here in New Richmond in the historic district, especially I love to walk down 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Street because the houses are just gorgeous. I mean, the ornamentation and the Victorian craftsmanship is just beautiful. And there's just always I always find that there's a sense of just mystery looking up into the windows of a very old house. And I don't quite know why, but, one always imagines, well, who used to live there and what were their lives like? Sort of that idea. So houses come up a lot in my stories. And I also grew up in a century-old farmhouse. So I think that probably that part of my upbringing has a great deal to do with my love for them. You know, but oddly enough, I find that sometimes what really kicks off a good story or an idea is an object. If I can find an object to write a story around, and I don't know if that qualifies for a trope necessarily, but for example, I was working at the bookstore, and some people came in to sell some books to us. And at the bottom of this box of books was this old, tattered, ripped up piece of newspaper advertisement. And the advertisement was for something called the Haunted House Mystery Bank. And what it was this little haunted house. It was like about this high and this wide. And if you put a coin on the doorstep, the door would open. There would be a bunch of strange sounds going on inside the house, and this little yellow hand would come out and grab the coin and drag it in, and the door would shut, and all the lights would turn off. But I think it was actually, you know what? It was an advertisement on the back of an Archie's comic book. I was remembering incorrectly before. But I wrote a whole story just based around that, and it's called The Haunted House Mystery Bank. So sometimes just finding an object to write a story around really sets things off. In fact, my first published story was called The Typewriter, which I sold for, I think like 15, 20 bucks. It was $25 to an anthology called Accursed, and all the stories had to deal with cursed items or just cursed in general. That was the trope. And then I mentioned earlier about going back on my family's farm and finding the horse skull. That kicked off a story. So I'm very kind of like object oriented. I think that would be an effective way to drum up creativity.
I love the haunted house thing. I was born on Halloween, so yeah. So I was exposed from a very young age. I watched all of the Universal monster movies. My mother was like, these are the classics. You need to watch these, and I graduated in 1993. So I grew up when we had this kind of horror explosion going on. Granted, I didn't always have cable, so I didn't get to see all of the new ones, but I've constantly been inundated with the horror, which I do not mind at all. But the haunted houses are always my favorite as well. I'm going to bring it back to one of your stories again from Daydreams of the Damned. A Skeleton Reads Shakespeare I love how you wrote this story. I don't want to spoil things for people, but this story is a great combination of kind of a cross between a haunting and just a story of a house put together, and just the afterlife of dreams sort of is how I perceived it. I don't know if I necessarily caught exactly what you're going for, but it was somebody who lived to experience and to share, and then was cut off and cut off and cut off until am I right there? And
yeah. I'm glad you like that story. I think that's my favorite story in Daydreams of the Damned. I think it's the best one in there, at least for me. I tend to have this idea that we all die twice. First is, of course, the bodily form, and then what persists after is the memory that people have of us. And once those memories go, we go for good. I think it was in a Virginia Woolf novel. She says there was a character in there that said, even a rock will outlast Shakespeare, which is a terribly depressing notion. But, I think memory is very interesting, and I think that consciousness is very interesting. But yeah, that story is essentially it begins with a skeleton that is conscious and able to move around. He lives in his old house, but a new family has moved in, and he likes this family. He sort of interacts with one of the members, but most of them can't really see him. He's just and so it's just the story about following him as time moves on around him. Soon the family grows up, and then they move out. Another family moves in, they move out. The house gets old and older and older until it's decimated, it's demolished. But and he is also demolished. His skeleton is completely broken apart, but his consciousness continues on. And I guess I won't give away the ending of the story, but it's just kind of touching on those themes of memory, consciousness, and what it means to lose those things in the face of oblivion. You know.
And one of the themes that I've picked up on, and like I said, I've read a decent amount of your stuff, but not all of it. And I've been working on. I'm definitely finishing by the end of this weekend everything that you've written that I can find anyway. It's so guys, it's fascinating. He's an exceptional writer. But I don't try to put somebody into just a category, but I try to grab something when I read a new author. If I cram read more than just a couple of stories of somebody new, what I think that they do well, not necessarily the only thing they do, but one of the things that they do well. And I think you portray devastation in a way that I don't see many other people able to do. Your stories, they might just be a personal devastation or an entire town or world or something like that, but you don't hold back on it. You don't make things better just for a Hollywood type of ending or anything. You really grab it and embrace it and let us feel it, from the character's perspective, from the outside perspective as well, watching it and just seeing how these things can be destroyed, be it people or trust or love or having the monsters come in and take over and do stuff. Is that something that you aim for? Is it just kind of an unconscious thing, or am I totally off base?
Oh, not at all. Thank you so much for saying that. Nobody's actually pointed that out in my writing, so I appreciate that very much. Yeah, I see it completely what you mean. The devastation aspect is definitely it's a subconscious thing for sure. It just kind of comes about organically. God, I think you would need a psychologist to figure out what the hell that means. But I think that's just tapping into my own terror of what could be. And a lot of stories start off with, what if this happened? What if that happened? Or sometimes, every once in a while, as I'm going about my day, I will think, what if the worst possible thing happened right now? What would it look like? And so just that element of devastation is so terrifying to me, simply because it's so realistic. I mean, we see the effects of devastation all over the world and all throughout history, which is a horror show, and today, which is a horror show. So, yeah, devastation is a fine theme for a writer to pick up their pen for, because it also just has to do with the human condition. I mean, the most important things that a person can write about is life and death, and devastation is just part of life,
And another thing that I wanted to comment on was, as I said, I'm near the end, but I did not finish reading our Holy Leviathan. And I'm not going to give too much away, I don't think, by saying this. The main character, there's some changes, not so much in time, but almost in time, traveling into a different sort of reality that's going on. And I noticed one of the things you said, I changed my little line to, I wish to be caught up in amber. It's something I always love, the idea of something trapped in amber and encased in time and kept there. But you also intrigued me with the way the story's main character is looking back and is looking at this world where not a lot has changed for hundreds of years. And they're like, do I want to stay here? Because I could stay here. I've always felt like I was out of time, out of place, and I could maybe make a home here and make a new life here. But should I go back home? I'm not really sure. And trapped between that. And when I was a kid, I mean, now I have things with like closer ties to family and everything. But when you're a kid, you sit there and think like, well, if I could travel through the wardrobe, I'd never go back. I'd stay in Narnia forever. You watch The Labyrinth and you're like, why would she say no to the Goblin King? What did she have left to keep her there? She didn't like anyone. She didn't care for anyone. And so having that aspect of getting the chance, what do you choose? And it's something I think that changes as we as we grow up and have to start accepting more and more responsibilities. But what if we could leave those responsibilities behind? I was really intrigued by the way you posited all of that for us. And is that something else that back when you were a kid, did you want to cross over and live in Narnia or somewhere like that?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I grew up around a lot of woods, and there was always the feeling of, well, maybe this, a magical feeling about the woods. Once you're in there, maybe I'll just make a home here. Maybe I just won't come home for dinner. And of course you play that little game with yourself, and it gets later and later and later, and then your parents start calling for you, like, well, hell, I'll go to dinner. But there is that feeling that you could, especially as a kid, that you could just step into fantasy and never return. But with our Holy Leviathan, I mean, there's just a whole bunch of just commentary about being an outsider or being a pariah, in particular, in terms of the era in which one is born. And I think, like a lot of people, I very much feel like an outsider. I don't, of course, I am a very modern person, but I don't feel like one. I still handwrite my letters. For example, Joshua Rex and I, we carry on a correspondence that way, a marvelous way to carry on a conversation with someone. But when it comes to social media, or it comes to just anything online, it just seems foreign to my nature, and it seems foreign to the nature of the main character in our Holy Leviathan, Brian Hodgson, as well. A friend of mine pointed out when he read the book that it seemed as if its author was trying to anchor himself in a time that is now and not now simultaneously. And so the main character, when he's in a plane crash, he's a castaway on this strange island called Macabre, which is located somewhere off the coast of Ireland. And he comes across this strange community of people who are most of them are very friendly. They're very gregarious, and but they all act and dress and behave as if they're from the 19th century. But the people there know they're not from the 19th century. This isn't a Twilight Zone where he goes back in time, but it feels like that throughout the majority of the book. In fact, the reader is likely to forget that they're reading something which takes place in modern day. But so I wrote this because, I feel like maybe I could step into the 19th century, and of course I'd be dead meat. I would not last very long in the 19th century, especially before anesthetic and it, it would be a very difficult time to live in, I would think. It has its own unique challenges. But writing that allowed me to go back into a time in fantasy and live there, while also just coming to terms with, I'm a person just like anybody else, driving a car, on Facebook, or whatever it is. Yeah.
I really liked how the main character starts off, can I use your phone? Do you have a phone? Can you take it? And then starts falling into do I really need a phone? I love how you got rid of the technological aspect, but acknowledged that it was there.
Right.
Like we are in this time, this character does know what all these things are. These people are not thrown off at all by him asking about such things, but they kind of scoff at it as like, we don't need such things out here. We don't use such things. And it makes him question and slowly become more interested in becoming part of the community.
Right. Yeah. And also what I tried to do with that book as well is I begin the book. The first few chapters are written hopefully in a more modern idiom. It's less florid. It's less less of the $10 words which we spoke about earlier. It's more the style is more clipped. It's more everything is honed down to very short sentences. But as the story goes on, as the character begins to become more comfortable with his environment, in particular being a whaleman, which is a nasty business in the 19th century, adventurous, enthusiastic, at times erotic, extremely strange, extremely dangerous, but he finds that he has a natural proclivity for being a whaleman, and he just becomes absolutely absorbed in this community where he actually, for the first time in his life, feels like he belongs. And then once he gets to that point, he starts speaking and thinking in 19th century language. There's more Dickens, there's more Hawthorne, there's more Poe, there's more Oscar Wilde, and some of the decadence of the story, and so forth.
And the diary allows you to go back. You guys will see it when you read it because you're going to read it. To let him go back and catch some of that flow as well. But he does fall. I don't want to give too much away, but in the first whale hunt, when he does suddenly become almost overwhelmed by the spirit of everything, it was like something is almost taking him over in this time period. And I finally found my purpose. I finally know what I should have been doing, and this is why I fell out of place the whole time in my own time.
It's such a great point. Absolutely.
And Raz, you had a question.
Yeah, it was a comment actually, or a statement. I got a chance to take a lot of classes and learn under a fantastic horror author, Tim Wagner. And one of the things he taught us in one of our classes is the use of technology in modern horror. And one of the biggest problems we face is, the audience. Why didn't they just use a phone? Yeah, they could have just bypassed all this crazy shit if they'd have just borrowed a phone, or where's their phone? It showed it in the beginning, but then they just lost it. And he talked a lot about, how we can recognize that technology, but also come up with inventive and new ways as to why that technology isn't available to them at the time, to kind of get the audience basically to shut the fuck up about the phones or about the email or the computer or whatever. Sure. And I love the way you did that with this. Like Del was mentioning, the way you did that was the way that I hadn't even thought about, honestly, identifying technology and not using it. Are there other ways you've done that or thought about doing that in the future?
Oh yeah. Well, thank you. I'm glad that it worked. I tend to write stories. Well, lately I'm writing a lot of Victorian stories, so I kind of can just sidestep all of that stuff, which is which is great. I don't have to think about it. But when I'm writing a story that takes place in modern day, usually I write a character that has the sort of personality where they just don't give a shit about the phone. They don't. Their personality doesn't make sense for them to have a phone in the story, and that's also a means to get rid of avoiding the technological element. You can just make characters that are like me. They're old school. They don't check their phone every 10 seconds. They probably have a phone, but maybe they just don't really need it in the story. They're not in this sort of dire situation that maybe they need one. But yeah, that can be a tricky thing. Honestly, even writing our Holy Leviathan, when the technological aspect came up, I debated whether I wanted to even mention the phrase cell phone, if I even wanted the words in the book. And I decided it was a good idea because that is the objection that readers are going to have. What about a phone? What about whatever? But yeah. I hope that answers the question.
Oh, definitely. I know one of the ways that I often do it. What I noticed, the people that are more obsessed with their phones or technology are also the people that constantly forget to charge their phones and technology. So in the beginning of a story, if they were doing a TikTok, a character was doing something, heavily technological related, I can just, put little facts in about the forgetfulness of them as a character and little details kind of in the background. Sure. Then here comes that terrifying moment. They're about to call the cops and fuck, my battery died.
Right. Yep.
We might be getting a visit from Her Greatness Hinata. She's trying to decide. Oh, here we go. Sorry. This is Hinata. She decides that she's going to show up and hang out on podcasts every now and then. Sometimes she will drape her loveliness here and just meow at us off and on.
Most charming.
Yes.
And what is her name again?
Hinata.
Hinata.
After one of the characters in Naruto. I started naming my cats after ninjas because I think cats are ninjas.
Perfect.
But she's a terrible ninja. She knocks things over. She's clumsy. She just kind of flails everywhere. But she's a good cat. I was also we had talked before. Did you have something that you were going to do as a reading this evening?
I do have a piece that I would like to read. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. If you want to get that ready, I will blow up your window and not in an explosive fashion, but get it so we can have that ready to go. So
Okay.
here we go.
All right. So what I've chosen to read will be included in my next short story collection. This is a very musical story. It's called Cecilia. Cecilia's Complete Organ Works, Preludes, Toccatas, Fantasias, Fugues, and Sonatas, which is probably the longest title that I've ever had for a short story. But I'll just read the first few scenes here. 1. Prelude. I stumbled upon the ancient pipe organ in my adolescence, a chance meeting that rather resembled the scenario of a naive boy crossing paths with a wise old widow. I was barely 14 at the time, and possessed little to no passion for anything beyond the pages of my favorite books. I had no interest in sailing the Atlantic, for Melville's Moby Dick transported me to that watery part of the world any time I wished. In regard to the deserts of the East, the Arabian Nights quite settled that. And as for the Gothic mansions and haunted hereditary halls, I had the complete tales and poems of Poe to keep me company. My parents were simple-minded folk, kind and gentle. Dad was a dentist, my mother a newly established liberal arts professor. They held no strong opinions, or, if they had, did not air them openly, did not care for politics, and though they believed in God, possessed no preference for any particular religion. Perhaps that is why I held no dogmas, no hobbies, and certainly no passion. Indeed, I did not much care for anything, until the year my family relocated across several states to the small town of Sweet Hollow, Wisconsin. We moved into a quaint historic house, nestled in the rural outskirts, a locale of dense dark woods interspersed with fields of corn and verdant grass, a veritable countryside checkerboard. Due to my distance from town, the school bus trudged down many winding gravel roads, the farthest it drove for any student at Sweet Hollow Middle School. This peculiarity cost me my public reputation straight away. Bullies sought me out, cursed my existence, spit in my hair, and in all ways abused me. While I begged my parents to drive me to school, they plainly refused, not out of some hot-tempered passion, for such was not their nature, but rather out of the pragmatic reason that they worked far too early in the morning. Truth be told, life improved once school let out. The school bus retired to its garage, the bullies stuck to the town's residential streets many miles away, and my parents worked in the evenings. The whole summer, I was alone. Boredom found me straightaway, a tedious ghost that stalked all my hours. I yawned and read the same books again and again. How I longed for a new passion, a new voice to sweep me away. Then, one sweltering afternoon, overcome with insufferable ennui, I took to roving the shadowy green woodlands. I became, if you will, an explorer. I fancied myself like Indiana Jones, searching for treasure, for gold, for a magic papyrus scroll that would expel the boredom of a long, lonely summer, if only I knew the magic words, comprehended the precise balance of a booby-trapped scale, or played the perfect notes upon an ancient organ. A breeze blew, ruffling my t-shirt. A singular high note, gentle, trembling, sounded on the wind. The prettiest thing I'd ever heard. Not even a melody, and yet, such a fantastic note, so sublimely soothing. It drew me deep into the woods. The note persisted, a propitious pitch that spoke to a depth of myself I knew not even existed. Dare I say, a singular flame of passion grew. A clearing opened. The sun shone down over the treetops, and, forming a heavenly golden halo, fell solely upon the old pipe organ. The notes continued, unwavering, for now I understood the wind grazed over one of the tall vertical pipes, akin to a breeze sounding over a bottle's lip. The instrument was nearly rotten through. Its 3 manuals were nearly destroyed, several of the keys having torn away. Tall brush obscured the sides of the casement. Verdant lichen grew upon 2 sets of tarnished pipes, oxidizing in the sun, succumbing to time before my very eyes. It was, truly, a most strange and beautiful sight. The wind strengthened. A vortex formed in the clearing. A whirl of wild wind, as if all the trees of the forest swept the breeze into their eaves and carried it here, to this special circle in the woods where verdant brush grew tall, purple thistles bloomed, and at the center of it all, the abandoned organ. A mossy bench stood before it. To my surprise, it did not so much as creak beneath my weight. The moment I situated myself before the organ, hands hovering above the lower keyboard, feet placed methodically, as if I had any inkling as how to play the damned thing, over the wood pedals, only did that singular silver trembling note cease. All fell under a hush. Birds quieted in the trees, silent predators in nature's auditorium. The wind circled round and the trees swayed, but there was no sound. It felt as if I had suddenly come alive in a silent film. All the better to hear the organ, I thought, and adroitly flinched, for the idea seemed utterly not mine, as if whispered into my ear. I placed my hands upon the rotted keys, and, having no skill nor knowledge in anything musical, I tell you I played the organ wonderfully. The sound issuing forth from the pipes was profound. My very being trembled in perfect pitch with the notes executed by my own fingers and by my own feet pressing upon the pedals. Despite the termites infesting the keys, pedals, and stops, as well as the sheer quantity of rainwater clogging the pipes, a gorgeous melody resounded into the air. Impossible. The wind fed the pipes, and the pipes fed my soul. Soon the sun grew into a ruby sphere and hung low in the sky. The pipes would play no more. I pressed the keys. Silence. I frowned at my hands as if I were to blame, and I cursed the organ, utterly disappointed. Yet I immediately regretted the curse, as if the instrument possessed feelings, a personality, and was vulnerable to insult. Tears rushed to my eyes, sadness and surprise confounding me in equal measure. I stood from the bench and trudged out of the clearing. The woods grew dark and gloomy. All the typical forest noises fell upon my ears, the wild twittering sparrows, the chittering squirrels, the wind in the eaves. All of it sounded wrong, a mockery in comparison to the sheer beauty of the pipe organ. I grew lost. Thistles tore open my jeans and scratched my legs. I heard bats in the trees. Panic descended fully upon me, growing oppressively heavier with every receding fraction of sunlight. Darkness gathered. Soon I wouldn't be able to see. Then, with great relief, I spied the gleam of fluorescent lights through the brush, warm, illuminated windows. My heart quit its jackhammering and I breathed evenly. Quietly, I snuck inside my home. Father stood at the sink, washing dishes. Mother fixed dinner at the stove. She gazed at me when I walked in, her docile eyes suddenly widening with horror. I attempted to smile, my face smudged with dirt, my t-shirt ripped and clinging to my sweaty flesh. "My sweet boy!" Mom cried, rushing to wipe the blood from my scraped elbow. "So, you've taken up hiking," Dad smiled proudly. "That's very fine." "George!" Mom scolded him. "Look at him, all roughed up." "That's very fine," he repeated insistently. "After all, a boy ought to find some way to pass the time." "Oh, George." 2. Toccata. Thus a love affair began. A boy and his pipe organ. An unlikely coupling, yet I truly cared for nothing more than the delicious sound of the pipes. The tall, gleaming, vertical pipes which issued forth by power of the wind those most delicate and sublime of resonances. Intoxicating. I grew drunk on sound, romanced by the feel of chipped keys beneath my fingers, wooed by the solid wedge-shaped pedals beneath my shoes. Oh, God, every boy remembers his first love, his first kiss upon the smooth brow of some young babe. And yet my first kiss, my initial embrace, my most profound affair, was with the ancient pipe organ in the woods, existing there in the sun and rain and wind for who knew how long, perhaps eternity. Voices sung in the pipes. My fingers performed sign language for those voices, and the voices formed notes in kind. Thereupon melodies were born. As the hot summer days flitted away, time and again my entire body trembled and vibrated to ecstatic pitch, my whole physique become a sensual tuning fork, all in synchronization with the resounding pipes. Then, suddenly, a name on the wind. It circled in the clearing, brushing the treetops. It soon fell to my fingers, coursed in vast pressure up and through the pipes, then burst full into my receptive ears. Cecilia. She kissed my fingertips, and I embraced the whole of her body. Our songs formed a strange glory, yet when the sun went down, the pipes silenced, and I knew it was time to journey home. I took comfort in knowing tomorrow would inevitably find me in the woods again, sitting on the bench, her keys passionately stroking my soul. And I'll stop there. That's the setup for the story, essentially.
Oh, that was beautiful. Thank
Definitely
you.
well done.
Oh, my pleasure.
I'm
Thank you.
so buying that next book because that just gripped me.
Thank you. Thank you.
You are
And
lovely in your work.
Thanks very much.
Yes, you definitely I don't know if you plan on doing audiobooks, but I would love to hear you reading your. There are some authors who just can't,
Mhm.
and there are some who can, and you're definitely one who can. So,
That's very kind of you. Thank you very much.
Friday had another question.
I love to ask all the authors this because every so often I get a very different answer. And I was wondering, do you believe zombies can climb?
Oh, gosh. Well, when I think of the zombie, of course, I think of the traditional Romero zombie. Well, I feel if the zombie had an inkling that there was some meat that it could go after, some brains it could go after, that it would certainly attempt to climb. Whether or not it would be a successful climb would depend on how many footholds it has. But yes, I think a zombie would have the ability to consider the idea of climbing, even though that's probably somewhat against its nature. I don't tend to think of zombies as sort of upward-looking creatures, but then again, it depends on the zombie. I know Romero's zombies were near the end there. They were upward-looking creatures. They started to evolve, I believe, right around Land of the Dead. Well, Dawn of the Dead too, but Land of the Dead, they really, started looking up instead of just downward or kind of straightforward, lumbering fashion.
Yeah, so one of them remembered the ability to use simple tools during Land of the Dead as well.
That's right.
And the fabled unreleased Twilight of the Dead, which we just found out recently, the estate is going to finally officially release it with some new footage. And that one, a lot more of the zombies had gained some level of the skills they possessed when they were alive.
Oh, fascinating. Fascinating.
We keep learning new things. Everybody gets new releases, and we're excited. I was bringing up Romero. I was just like, Raz is going to give a grin, and he's going to be so happy that you mentioned that.
I'm a big Romero fan, but also the split off with Return of the Living Dead. I love that just as much as the original Living Dead series. But what a lot of people don't know is there's actually multiple categories of zombie, because you have your traditional Romero, and Romero does have his own category. You also have the traditional Haitian zombie. You've got infected zombies like 28 Days Later. There's mutated, military experiment zombies like Return of the Living Dead. So, like, when people say zombie, like, it's kind of hard for me sometimes because I know all the classifications and like the creations and the
Yes.
different abilities. And then you've got like things like The Walking Dead, and that one they do climb. They climb up ladders. They can run. They can. There's a lot more that they can do with the expansion of the zombie mythos. So it's really interesting to see kind of where other people
Yes.
start from when they think of the word.
Yep. It really depends on the type. I know with the voodoo zombie, it's more of a mind control thing as opposed to rotting flesh or any of that. So it'd be like, does the master say climb the ladder or climb the tree? And if he does, then I would think so.
Mhm.
With Romero zombies, they might fall apart as they're climbing the tree and therefore not be too successful.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Thank you.
So before we take off tonight, I want to remind everybody that they should go right now and get their hands on our Holy Leviathan. Currently, what you have is pre-orders for the signed and lettered deluxe hardcover edition with the slipcase. That's up on Weird House Press. So if you guys want to look it up, either look up Our Holy Leviathan by Tylor James or look it up through the Weird House Press site. There are still 14 left in stock, so you got about half of them covered there already. And as you're a fan of his, and a good friend of his. We're going to use, as far as praise for the book goes, a quote from Joshua Rex. Tylor James is a writer on a journey, a decidedly dark one, to be sure, one that swerves and meanders from the gothic to the weird to the supernatural and beyond. His work has a nostalgic wash of sentiment seen in Bradbury, with the bleak ruminations of Lovecraft and the decisive precision and questioning of Poe. So we would like to get everybody out there to go and grab a hold of that. Also, we have some weird stuff, like I said, going on with the way Facebook is handling things right now. So I'm giving away Beneath the Jack-O-Lantern Sky to those who were able to comment tonight. And so that we do not count ourselves within the commentary, I'm going to go ahead and for Pastole or Pastole, I'm not sure how you pronounce yourself, and Tom at Real Pro, you're each going to get a link. Pastole, I will send you a message via Facebook so that I can get your, so I can send you the link to it and let you know who I am. It will come up under Delphine Galdrakaka, which is what I go by here. And yeah, did anybody have any final questions before we take off tonight?
I feel like we covered a lot.
All right, Tyler, where do you like people to reach out for you? And where do you return stuff to? And what is your favorite form of social media contact? And what do you have coming up that you would like to share with us?
Oh, well, you can find me on Facebook. And you can also find me on Twitter at my handle is @CreatureKillsWe. I'm also on Instagram, Tylor the Writer. And yeah, you can reach out to me on any of those platforms. That's just fine. And of course, as mentioned, our Holy Leviathan. There's still 14 copies left, so now is a good time to pick that up. And please do. I'm a poor man, poor and desperate. And then I got a collection that's coming out later this year to look forward to called The Wikis and Other Macabre Tales, which I'm very excited about, and I think people are going to find very interesting.
Is that also going to be through Weird House? You mentioned, I can't remember.
Yes, it will also be
Okay.
through Weird House Press, and this one, this one will have a trade paperback release, so one won't just be the highly collectible special deluxe edition, which is those are fantastic, beautiful books. But for those who like the paperback and the Kindle, the Wikis and Other Macabre Tales will be available.
And will our Holy Leviathan end up being available on Kindle and such as well after the initial release is done?
Our Holy Leviathan, as far as I'm aware, will only be available exclusively as the hardcover.
Okay.
However, in my next collection, and again, there's no release date on this yet, but our Holy Leviathan, the story will be featured in the next collection as the concluding novella. So readers can access it there at some point down the road.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. And Keenan, you as well will be getting a chat with me from Facebook, from YouTube. I'm used to Facebook. I'm getting really, there's been a lot of changes going on these days on how Facebook allows you to stream things, which has impacted every single streaming service that we use. And so forgive me if I get a little confused on things. But you'll be getting a message from me as well. Sorry, having a moment here. You speak so eloquently, and then I feel like I'm just falling over myself trying to word.
Oh gosh,
I do sometimes. But if you guys would like to get in touch with me, I am here on the Owlite Network as Delphine, and you can reach me on about half of the shows that we do, which take place on Sunday, Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday nights now. Some of those are alternating nights, and we have a new schedule coming up for this summer, which if you go to our page, the Owlite Network on Facebook, you can see all of the scheduled shows that we have coming up each week. I am also here every Tuesday, an hour earlier, on the Dorkening Network for Splash Pages, which is a comic book show. This upcoming week, we have Colin Bunn and a duo with Tyler Crook. So if you would like to catch up with that, they're great horror comic writers. They have done some mainstream, but we're focusing on Harrow County, which is kind of an old American horror haint type of feel to it. So it's got this great Americana horror feel going on. If you contact me on most of my socials, you will end up hearing from Friday, who is, as Raz likes to say, one of the best cosplayers in the world because she pretends to be all of us at once most of the time. I'm going to bump over Raz. Where do you like people finding you?
You can find me at Raz T Slasher or wherever toys are sold now with Kung Fu Action Grip.
And then Friday, on to you.
Hi. First, I want to tell you guys we have this amazing anthology coming out with haunted houses, with Camaros, with so many other amazing stories. And all the proceeds go to the Pro Literacy Foundation. And they get to help adults get all the success they need and different resources with helping them to learn how to read. And you get to read all our amazing stories. And you can find me on Facebook, you can find me on Owlite, and you can find me at, well, not Facebook, but you can find me at Fake Horror. You can find me on Owlite. She has me tripping up now. And you can find me at Friday with the Library in the Blue Box and on my author stuff, Jennifer Elliott. And I pretend to be him too.
This. So yeah, keep an eye out for the Owlette Menagerie. It will be coming out very soon. We'll be talking about it. We'll be having a book release for it. And all she was saying goes everything to pro literacy. So we love these folks. And thank you so much, Tyler, for being on with us. And I cannot wait to finish reading the story I'm into right now. That's going to happen as soon as I get off with you. And that sounded horrible. I have to work on phrasing. As soon as we get
are we
done
not doing
with you as the
phrasing
show.
anymore?
Yeah, I know. I'm the worst at it ever. I don't know what it is. I can't do it right. But thank you for coming on. Please stay with us for a moment after we are done. And to everybody else, thank you so much for showing up and hanging out. Hopefully, Facebook will let us get to the point where we can go back to the amount of viewers that we used to have going on with the shows, and it will make things easier. And look forward to talking to you again probably tomorrow. Good night, everybody.
Good night.